like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
All right, so we're diving into something pretty special today. College football's first ever on-campus playoff game. Notre Dame versus Indiana. Friday night, under the lights. Huge implications for both teams as this new 12-team playoff era kicks off. You sent over some excerpts from the Athletics live coverage. We're going to pull out all the juicy details, the stuff you wouldn't catch just watching the game on TV.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that we're not just talking about the final score. We're going to uncover those hidden narratives that make this game so significant, those behind-the-scenes moments.
Exactly. You're going to feel like you were right there in the stands, hearing those "we want Georgia" chants firsthand. We'll unpack Jeremiyah Love's 98-yard touchdown run, break down why Indiana's usually explosive offense sputtered, and even get a little preview of that upcoming Sugar Bowl matchup between Notre Dame and, you guessed it, Georgia.
I think what will really stand out to you is how this game reveals some larger trends we're seeing in college football right now.
Okay, so first let's set the scene. Notre Dame ranks 7th, going in, ends up beating 10th-ranked Indiana 27-17. Sounds like a pretty comfortable win for the Irish, right?
Well, the final score might not tell the whole story. This game had a very distinct ebb and flow with some real surprises along the way.
Yeah, it started off wild, 2 interceptions in the first 3 drives. Talk about setting the tone, and then boom, Jeremiyah Love explodes for a 98-yard touchdown run. Did you see that?
Oh, yeah. Love's speed was on full display there. But it also seemed like Notre Dame's game plan from the start was to establish the run, and that play really set the stage for their offensive strategy.
But then things kind of settled down for a while. It wasn't until those last 2 minutes that things got interesting again, with Indiana putting up 2 touchdowns. Almost felt like too little too late, though.
And that late surge raises some questions about both teams, doesn't it? For Notre Dame, it makes you wonder if they can maintain that defensive intensity for a full 4 quarters. And for Indiana, their high-powered offense just didn't show up for most of the game. Makes you wonder if they can really hang with the big dogs in this new playoff format.
Yeah, Indiana came into this averaging 43 points a game, and then Notre Dame holds them to their second lowest score all season. That's a huge statement. The Athletics stats show Notre Dame with 394 total yards of offense compared to Indiana's 278. But here's the real kicker. Notre Dame had 193 rushing yards to Indiana's 63.
Wow. Yeah, that discrepancy is telling. It really looks like Notre Dame's defense shut down Indiana's ground game, completely forcing them to become one-dimensional and rely solely on Curtis Rourke's arm.
Which, as we know, didn't really work out for them. Let's talk about some of those key players. Obviously, we have to start with Jeremiyah Love. I mean, that 98-yard run is something else.
It was a game changer for sure. And when you look at his overall stats, 108 rushing yards on just 8 carries, that's impressive efficiency. This was his 5th game this season with over 100 rushing yards, and to do it on only 8 carries, that explosiveness is going to be a real threat going forward.
He's a real weapon.
Yeah.
And on the other side of the ball, you've got Riley Leonard for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
It wasn't a flashy performance, but he got the job done right. The Athletic even called it a quintessential Riley Leonard game, meaning it was just what we've come to expect from him, steady, controlled, making the plays when he needs to.
Yeah, he really managed the game well, led some long scoring drives, didn't make any major mistakes. That's what you need in a playoff game, although it does raise the question, is efficient enough against a team like Georgia? We'll see.
Ooh, good point. Now, for Indiana, their quarterback, Curtis Rourke, he came into this game with a 70.4 completion percentage, but he looked pretty rattled out there against that Notre Dame defense.
Yeah. And this is where those deeper stats get interesting. The Athletic points out that against unranked opponents this season, Rourke was averaging almost 46 points per game. But against ranked teams, that average drops to a measly 16 points.
Wow, so maybe their schedule wasn't as tough as we thought. Are they pretenders, not contenders?
Well, the Athletics' Bruce Feldman put it this way, and I think it's a perfect analogy. Indiana's offense is like a high-performance sports car. It looks amazing on a smooth track, but put it on a bumpy road, and it starts to fall apart. Seems like those tougher defenses really expose some weaknesses in their offensive strategy.
I love that analogy. Speaking of defenses, we got to give a shout-out to Notre Dame's D. They were suffocating.
They absolutely shut down Indiana's high-powered offense, and this is where the expertise from the Athletic really comes in. They were talking about how Notre Dame's defensive coordinator, Al Golden, completely neutralized Indiana's signature downfield passing game. They even mentioned the return of Howard Cross from injury as a major factor in their ability to put pressure on Rourke.
But there was one concerning development for the Irishness. Riley Mills got injured. It's not season-ending, but he's definitely going to need some recovery time. That could be a problem against a team like Georgia.
Absolutely. Mills is a key part of their defensive line, and his absence could be a major factor in the Sugar Bowl. We know Georgia's offense is a whole different animal, and they'll be looking to exploit any weaknesses they can find.
Speaking of the Sugar Bowl,
Yeah.
you gotta love the drama that's already brewing. Remember Kirby Smart's pregame comment about Notre Dame fans chanting, "We want Georgia"? He basically said they got to win this one first. Well, they did. Now it's on.
And now we have a rematch of the 1981 Sugar Bowl, where Georgia actually beat Notre Dame for their second national title. Smart also has a history with Notre Dame, with 2 close wins against them while he was at Georgia.
The early betting odds had it as a pick'em game, meaning it's basically a toss-up.
It's going to be a fascinating matchup. On the one hand, you've got Georgia, the reigning champs, a team loaded with talent and experience. And on the other, you've got Notre Dame, who have historically struggled in the postseason, but seem to be finding their stride under Marcus Freeman. Plus, Freeman wasn't part of the coaching staff for those previous Georgia games. Does that give him an edge?
That's a great question. Okay, so before we get too deep into the Sugar Bowl predictions, let's circle back to this Notre Dame-Indiana game and pull out a few key takeaways.
One of the most obvious is that Indiana really seems to struggle against physically dominant teams. We saw it against Ohio State, and now we're seeing it again against Notre Dame.
That's a great point. If we connect that back to the bigger picture and this new playoff format, it makes you wonder if we're going to see more of these mismatches. Now that you've got teams with a wider range of talent levels in the playoffs, it's a real challenge for the committee to balance creating those Cinderella stories with ensuring we get truly competitive games.
Right, what's the priority? And then there's Notre Dame's defense, a force to be reckoned with, but can they replicate that performance against a team like Georgia?
Okay, well, let's dig into that and see what the Athletic had to say about the finer points of this game.
Yeah, the Athletic did a great job capturing the atmosphere of the game. It's clear that Notre Dame was prepared for Indiana's offense.
Yeah, you can see that in how they responded to those late Indiana touchdowns. Remember the ones that made the final score look closer than the game actually felt?
Oh, right.
The Athletic quoted Notre Dame's defensive coordinator, Al Golden, as saying simply, "Nope, we have the game in control."
It's interesting how confident he sounds, isn't it? He didn't even seem fazed by that late surge from Indiana. Just total belief in his defense and their game plan.
And it worked. But those late scores did raise some eyebrows, and not just among the fans. The Athletic's senior writer, Stuart Mandel, pointed out that if this 12-team playoff format was supposed to eliminate the blowout games we saw in the 4-team system, this wasn't exactly a promising start.
Yeah, he has a point. One of the big arguments for expanding the playoffs was to create more competitive games, more upsets, more drama. And while this game had its moments, it wasn't exactly a nail-biter for most of the night.
Right. I guess the real drama might unfold as the playoffs progress and those mismatches start to even out.
Yeah.
But let's talk about those late Indiana touchdowns for a second, because the Athletic actually captured some great fan reactions. One fan, Zachary, argued that Notre Dame intentionally let up on the pass rush at the end, like they were calling off the dogs to avoid any injuries in garbage time.
That's an interesting take, and it speaks to the strategic complexities of these high-stakes games. Coaches have to balance winning with player safety, especially with another huge game on the horizon.
Right, and of course, every fan becomes an analyst after the game. Another fan, Jonathan, actually calculated that based on the score differential, Ohio State must be 13 points better than Notre Dame. I mean, how do you even come up with that?
Yeah, it's a perfect example of how one game can be interpreted in so many different ways. Fans, analysts, even coaches, everyone draws their own conclusions, often influenced by their own biases.
Which is what makes sports so much fun to talk about. But putting those late scores aside, let's focus on Riley Leonard for a minute, because the Athletic had some interesting insights into his performance. He might not have had flashy stats, but the way he commanded the offense was impressive. What did you think?
He was the definition of game manager out there. Didn't force anything, didn't try to be a hero. He just took what the defense gave him and made smart decisions.
The Athletic's Austin Green called it a quintessential Riley Leonard game. And I think that's spot on. He's all about efficiency, composure, and making those clutch plays when it matters most.
And remember, he did all that against an Indiana defense that was pretty dominant all season. That shouldn't be overlooked.
Right. Okay, now on the flip side, Indiana's Curtis Rourke. He came into this game with a reputation as a gunslinger, someone who can make any throw. But against Notre Dame, he looked, well, a little off.
Yeah, it's like he was a completely different player than we saw against those unranked opponents. The Athletic highlighted a pretty shocking stat against unranked teams this season. Rourke and the Hoosiers averaged 46 points per game, but in their 2 games against ranked opponents, that average plummeted to a dismal 16 points.
So maybe that high-powered offense narrative was a bit overblown. Do you think they can adjust and bounce back?
It's hard to say. The Athletic pointed out that in both games against ranked opponents, Indiana's offense became predictable and one-dimensional. Seems like those elite defenses were able to figure them out pretty quickly and shut them down.
It's interesting how certain players or even entire teams can shine against weaker competition but then crumble when they face a real challenge. But speaking of shining, we can't move on without talking about Notre Dame's defense.
Yeah.
They were the real stars of this game, wouldn't you say?
No question. They were absolutely dominant, especially against the run. Remember, Indiana's Justice Ellison came into this game as one of the top running backs in the country, and they held him to just 37 yards on 11 carries.
That's insane. They shut down his run game completely,
Yeah.
which forced Indiana to rely even more on Rourke, who, as we discussed, was already struggling. It's a classic example of how a dominant defense can dictate the entire flow of a game.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to that looming question, can they replicate that performance against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl? Because remember, Georgia's offense is a completely different beast. They're much more balanced and versatile than Indiana, with a powerful running game and a more experienced quarterback.
So do you think Notre Dame's defense can rise to the challenge?
Well, that's where coaching comes into play. Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame's head coach, is known for his defensive brilliance. The Athletic did a deep dive into his coaching style earlier this season, and it's clear that he's a master strategist, constantly adapting and innovating.
So you think he can come up with a game plan that can contain Georgia?
He'll have to get creative. The Athletic pointed out that Georgia's offense thrives on misdirection and play-action passes, which can really throw a defense off balance. Freeman will need to find a way to disrupt their rhythm and force them into making mistakes.
It's interesting to think about the psychological aspect, too. Georgia is the reigning champ. The team with the target on their back. Notre Dame is the underdog, the team with nothing to lose.
Exactly. That can be a powerful motivator, especially in a high-pressure environment like the Sugar Bowl. And let's not forget, the Sugar Bowl is steeped in history and tradition. It's not just about X's and O's. It's about emotion, momentum, and those intangible factors that can swing a game in an instant.
Okay, let's set the stage for the Sugar Bowl showdown. Notre Dame's defense is playing lights out, but they'll be facing their toughest opponent yet in Georgia. And remember, those early betting odds had it as a pick'em game. But after Notre Dame's performance against Indiana, those odds have shifted slightly in their favor.
So the question on everyone's mind is, can they pull off the upset? Can Marcus Freeman, in his first major bowl game as head coach, lead the Irish to victory against the mighty Georgia Bulldogs?
And to add another layer of intrigue, let's not forget the historical context. Georgia has won all 3 of their previous matchups against Notre Dame, including those 2 close calls under Kirby Smart. Can Notre Dame finally break that streak?
Well, this Notre Dame team has a different energy, a different swagger. They've got a coach who's known for his defensive genius and a defense that's proven it can shut down some of the best offenses in the country.
So do you think this could be the year Notre Dame finally gets over the hump? The year they shock the world and take down the reigning champs?
That's the beauty of college football. You never really know. But let's dive deeper into this Sugar Bowl matchup and see if we can uncover any clues. Okay, so let's break this Sugar Bowl matchup down even further. Let's start with a matchup that could decide the entire game. Notre Dame's defensive line versus Georgia's offensive line.
This is strength versus strength, right? A clash of tight ends.
Exactly. The Athletic had a great piece about this very matchup. They were talking about how Notre Dame's defense thrives on pressure, disrupting the quarterback, creating havoc in the backfield. But Georgia's O-line is known for being an absolute wall. They're massive, they're disciplined, and they protect their quarterback like it's their job.
Which it is, I guess. But remember, Notre Dame might be without Riley Mills for this one. That could be a huge advantage for Georgia.
No doubt Mills is a difference maker on that defensive line. Without him, Notre Dame will need others to step up and fill that void. The Athletics seem pretty concerned about this, especially given the talent and depth of Georgia's running backs.
Speaking of running backs, that brings us to another key matchup. Notre Dame's linebackers versus Georgia's stable of backs.
Ooh, this is where things could get really interesting. Georgia's running backs are like a battering ram. They're powerful, they're elusive, and they can wear a defense down. Notre Dame's linebackers will need to be on their A game, making tackles, plugging those gaps, not letting those Georgia backs break free for big gains.
It's going to be a physical battle for sure. And then, of course, we have the quarterback showdown. Riley Leonard versus, well, we don't know who Georgia will start under center yet.
So that's right. It's still a bit of a mystery. But whoever gets the nod for Georgia, they'll be facing a tough test in that Notre Dame defense. The Athletics analysis highlighted their speed, their aggressiveness, and their knack for creating turnovers.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster if you're a quarterback. But Rellin has shown he can handle pressure. Do you think he can stay composed and make the plays they'll need him to make?
He's going to have to be at his best. The Athletic made a good point about Georgia's defense. They're known for disguising their coverages, which can really confuse a quarterback and lead to those game-changing interceptions. Leonard can't afford to make those kinds of mistakes against this Georgia team.
Okay, but beyond the players, you've also got this amazing coaching matchup. Marcus Freeman versus Kirby Smart. Two defensive masterminds going head-to-head.
This is what I'm most excited about. The Athletic described it as a chess match, and I think that's a perfect analogy. Freeman is all about those aggressive attacking schemes, while Smart is more of a strategic chameleon adapting his game plan to exploit his opponent's weaknesses.
It's going to be fascinating to see how they try to outmaneuver each other, and the winner of this coaching battle could very well decide the outcome of the game. So with all these factors in play, who do you think has the edge? Can Notre Dame pull off the upset?
Honestly, it's too close to call. Both teams have what it takes to win this game. Notre Dame's defense is on fire right now, but can they sustain that against a team like Georgia? And can Riley Leonard rise to the occasion and outduel whoever Georgia puts under center?
So many questions, and only the Sugar Bowl will give us the answers.
That's the beauty of it all, isn't it? The unpredictability, the drama, the chance for history to be made.
It's going to be an epic showdown, that's for sure, and one we'll be talking about for a long time. But before we wrap up this deep dive, let's bring it back to you, the listener. What are your predictions for this Sugar Bowl? Can Notre Dame, even with a potentially weakened defense, take down the reigning champs? Or will Georgia's experience and talent prove to be too much?
We've analyzed the stats, we've examined the matchups, but ultimately it's up to you to decide who you think will emerge victorious. So share your thoughts, continue the conversation, and let's enjoy the ride as this incredible college football season comes to a close.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have the ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.